as you look through the Old Testament, there's lots of ways that like death gets pictured that's not just like physical death, but of things that prefigure that. And exile is one of them. And so the exile from the garden prefigures death because they no longer have access to the source of life, to participate in the source of life, which is God's own immortality, which is granted through the tree of life. So then you have these moments where they're kind of offered that access back. But we see that in the very beginning, we're meant to be these inspirited bodies, basically inspirited bodies. If we're like getting a little bit more like where we're given God's breath, like God creates a human out of the dust of the earth and he breathes into this dust, which is kind of interesting to imagine, like a body coming out of this dust. And then that's when the human becomes a living being. And so if at any point after that the spirit and the body become separated, in order for God to be the God of life, resurrection kind of is necessary and on the table, even if there's not an explicit doctrine of resurrection, because God is the God of life. He's the God of the living. As Jesus says, like whenever he's asked about the doctrine of resurrection by the Sadducees, like God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of the living and not the dead, right? So there are these moments, and we see the Torah kind of punctuated by these moments of offering life and death back to the people. You can come back into life and follow God and follow his ways, and that is the way to life, or you can continue to go your own way, which is the way out into the wilderness, the desert, and out into the desert is death. You see that with Joseph. You kind of like, you get all these figures after Genesis 3 where you're like, is this the human that is going to bring back life into the death space and be the seed of Eve that brings life back to all mankind? And so you get these humans throughout the story that you're paying attention to, and then Joseph comes at the end of Genesis, and the end of Genesis is punctuated by that phrase, like, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. You intended my death, but God intended your life, like to save your lives through me going into Egypt. And so you're like, okay, and then how does Genesis end? He says, I am dying.
Yeah.
And bring up my bones up out of this place. Whenever God surely visits you, like visitingly visits you. It's like said twice. He'll visit you and make sure you take up my bones up out of this. And so Joseph's like, I'm not going to be the one that saves us from this death problem, even though he has the wisdom to discern life from death. So even in that very limited sense, wisdom itself becomes immortality. Like if you're granted God's wisdom, if you pursue God's wisdom, then you have access to life in the midst of the death space.
Something you see that in Proverbs too, Courtney. I believe it's chapter 3, I don't know, 2 or 3, where wisdom is almost like a person.